2 weeks ago, we started a series of lessons called Putting Aside Anger and Wrath. And then I forgot last week that I'd said we were going to do more than one lesson on it, so I didn't do that. I did something different last week. And I'm almost glad that I did, because this week I had opportunity to see an article in the Wall Street Journal that really excited me for this particular issue. So we're going to look at that tonight as we continue our series of lessons on putting aside anger and wrath and understanding appropriate anger. We said last time that we were together that most of the time our anger is going to be prone to lead us to sin. Most of the time our anger will. It takes tremendous wisdom and insight to be angry and not to sin. We talked about that a little bit. And we showed that the Bible repeatedly warns us to put aside wrath and anger. It repeatedly tells us not to be angry and not to sin. Yet we also noted that both God and Christ express anger at appropriate times and in righteous degrees. So let's continue our exploration of the subject of anger this week. And like I said, I have what I think is a pretty special approach tonight. Because in the Wall Street Journal on Wednesday, I noticed this past Wednesday, on July the 1st, I noticed a full-page article there by Elizabeth Bernstein in the Life and Art section of the newspaper. And she titled her article there, "Managing Anger in Angry Times." And then she had as a subtitle for her article, "Here's how to channel the emotion strategically rather than let it consume you." Now, I find it very interesting that anytime people talk about anger, one of the things they realize is that anger out of control can absolutely consume a person. And so we have to have strategies for dealing with our anger when anger is getting out of control. We have to have strategies to make sure that our anger doesn't get out of control. And so while, of course, being a secular article, Mrs. Bernstein made some numerous good statements and helpful insights for us that I think we'll be able to use with a biblical standpoint or of a biblical view to help us understand really how we deal with this anger issues. She said in her article that we're living in a time of great fury, and I think she's right. There's a great deal of anger going on in our world today. In the article, I'm quoting her saying, "We're living in a time of great fury. The strain is spilling over into our personal lives, fomenting hostility with friends, family, and even strangers, and harming our own emotional well-being." You're gonna have to give me just a second. I got some people waiting in the waiting room. Okay, thank you. She correctly states that our anger increases as our anxiety increases and kicks in our fight or flight responses. Now, all of us are born with that. We have what's called a fight or flight response that says when we find ourselves in stress, our body starts to superproduce adrenaline and such things, trying to help us to be prepared in case we have to fight or flight. Sadly, though, in our own nations or in our modern world, our bodies don't always know the difference between what's just regular stress and anxiety and what's really a problem for us. So our bodies will supercharge a lot of times when they don't need to. But she does state that we have to make sure. It's crazy. One second. I'm sorry, folks. People keep coming in late here. I got to let them into the room here. So give me a second. Okay. Anybody else comes, just going to have to wait, I guess. All right. She correctly states our anger increases our anxiety as our anxiety increases and kicks in our fight or flight response. So we want to make sure that we learn how to properly channel our anger. And she says the trick is to properly channel our anger by doing certain things. She first of all quotes from a neuroscientist by the name of Andrew Newberg, who is he's a teacher at the Marcus Institute of Integrative Health at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. And he used an illustration in the article of thinking of your anger and the degrees of your anger, sort of like tuning a guitar. He said you need to think of tuning a guitar. You need to use just the right amount of tension on the strings. If you want to play something beautiful, you've got to have the strings tightened just the right amount, not too much, not too little. And so he talks about anger in that way, and he says that if you control the degree of your anger, then you can still make it useful and not just something that's going to be a terrible thing for you. And then she also quotes a guy named Maurice Schweitzer, who's a professor. And he says, most of us are more comfortable being angry than being anxious. So we attempt to alleviate our anxieties over life's uncertainties. And so he says basically that we strike out at others and we become angry and we become abusive because we feel easier hurting somebody else than feeling anxious ourselves. And that's an interesting perspective for me because I find that it's oftentimes true. We'll do almost anything not to feel anxious ourselves, even if it means sometimes hurting somebody else to get ourselves feeling better. The article mentioned that too much internalized anger is harmful to our health, and that's certainly right. According to Srini Pillai, a psychiatrist, a brain researcher and CEO of Neuro Business Group, Holding anger in for too long drains our physical and emotional resources and is linked to high blood pressure, inflammation, infections, heart disease, strokes, and cancer. Folks, many of these effects have been known for a long time, and as they continue to study, they realize even more that excess anger and unprocessed anger will really make us sick people. It's quite obvious that God was trying to help us with these sorts of ideas, even if we didn't understand the psychology behind it. God was trying to help us by telling us things like Psalm 37, verse 8. It says, cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret. It leads only to evil doing. It also leads to personal harm, all right? So if we're fretting, if we're anxious, if we're overwrought, then our chance of striking out in anger is going to be more extreme. God just tells us to cease from anger and forsake wrath. Don't even go there. If we don't go there, then we'll be far less likely to explode and cause more trouble than it's worth. The article then stated that anger blinds us to others' viewpoints, and that's one of the worst things that I think that anger does. Is it makes it where that we're so busy raging at someone else that we can't stop to think about somebody else's viewpoint or see if they've actually got a point at all. The article stated, research shows that anger can diminish people's ability to understand other people's points of view. Angry people judge others more harshly than they judge themselves in moral dilemmas, a phenomenon psychologists call moral hypocrisy. They share less with others and they have less empathy. I think one of the greatest reasons why we want to learn to control our anger is because we want to be people who are full of empathy, we want to be empathetic people. We want to make sure that other folks can be treated well by ourselves. We want to make sure that they understand that we care about what they care about, and we want to know what they care about. We want them to understand that we care how they feel, and so we want to be people of empathy rather than people of anger. And I also want you to realize that any kind of hypocrisy that we have is something that we want to get rid of. So moral hypocrisy is just as bad as any other kind of hypocrisy. If we're judging folks more harshly because of our anger, then we should judge them. Then we can never be people who can be talked to or understand what other people feel. Those are most unchristian-like behaviors, and we don't want to be unchristian. We want to be Christian in everything that we do. So we have to be very cautious how we approach this idea of anger. The article really does a great job of talking about immediate ways to control anger, and I want to spend a little time talking about that tonight. The article stated that many people turn to exercise, meditation, writing in journals or poems or blogs or so on, and prayer. The last one probably should have been the first one. People ought to turn to prayer rather than anger right away. But these are great ways to control our anger. If you want to get rid of anger, the first thing you can do is pray. Then exercise, I think, was next. And the thing about exercise is that it helps to relieve our bodies of all those extra chemicals that are storing up when we're anxious or when we're angry. Helps to relieve those and burn them up in exercise and turn them into something positive rather than something negative. Same thing is true of meditation. We slow down our mind, we slow down our stress, and our attention we can regain our attention levels and so on by meditation and slowing down and counting to 10 or whatever. And then some folks find that if they're writing, they can get their thoughts down on paper rather than spewing them out to the world. And so even if you want to write angry stuff, you just go ahead and write it, but keep it to yourself. But they also find if they're creative in their writing that they can achieve some kind of a way to deal with their anger and deal with their stress and frustration, turn it into something beautiful in poems and journals and blogs and so on. So we want to find some ways to control our anger rather than let it just spew out. There's also many coping mechanisms and management mechanisms that we can use to try to manage our anger. And the first thing that the article brought out is we need to pinpoint the source. Ask the question, what is really making you angry? Is your anger integral? They ask about the cause of your anger. Or is it incidental, that you're angry at one thing but taking it out on another? Now, my own personal experience is that most of the time our anger is incidental anger. We're angry at one thing, but we're taking it out on another. I can remember a few times when folks have come to my office just angry about something, and we couldn't tell what they're angry about. But the more I started talking to them, the more I realized that what they were fussing about was not what they're angry about at all. Anger was something far different. So we need to realize that sometimes we'll be angry at somebody, but we're not really angry at them. We're angry at something else, but it's causing us to express our anger to somebody else. So we want to make sure that we can pinpoint the source of our anger, and that'll help us to deal with the anger appropriately. Then the second idea in the story was to be strategic. Make sure your anger is useful anger, right? I think that's a very biblical idea, and we'll look at it more as we continue. But the idea is that we want to make sure that we use our anger appropriately and not inappropriately. The next thing is we got to learn to calm our nervous system even when we're angry. So we need to focus and be slow to react. Give ourselves some thinking time before exploding or venting our wrath or anger at somebody else. We need to have time to let our nervous system calm down before we start reacting. It's one of the reasons why we have the count to 10 idea. And if you're really angry, count to 100. That's the idea that I put across before. So we need to make sure that we can do that. One other thing that makes folks angry a lot of times is that they feel like they're out of control of their world. They have so many irritants in their life that they just don't know how to do that. And so we need to learn how to reduce some irritants. Some things would be like decluttering your house. If your house is really messy, that can cause people to have a high degree of anxiety. Rest more, get proper rest at nights, and so on. So there's lots of ways that we can reduce the irritants in our lives. Sometimes your irritants may be some people that you need to get rid of, friends that are not really friends that bring you down. We have to be cautious about those things as well. The next thing it says is to reframe the story. Reframe the story. Change anger into compassion. Try to see someone else's view rather than just being angry. To turn our anger into compassion or choose compassion over anger is one of the greatest things that we can possibly do. It's what God does with us all the time. He has the right to be angry at us all the time, but he chooses compassion rather than anger. And so we'll see some more of that as we continue the lesson tonight. All of this to me sounds like some sound biblical advice. So let's take these latest the coping mechanisms we were just talking about, and let's reframe them into the story of the Bible and how the Bible talks about anger. Let's see what we can figure out from that. The first idea was to be strategic. How should we make our anger useful? There's some great ways, and I just want to look at a couple of those, starting in Psalm 37, verse 3 through 5. It says, "Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and cultivate faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust also in him, and he will do it." Now, I realized right away that verse doesn't say a thing about anger. It doesn't say anything about wrath. But it comes in the psalm itself. It comes right after the first advice, which is be not envious toward wrongdoers. Don't think that wrongdoers have it all right and you have it all wrong. Don't think that they are doing so much better in their life than you're doing. But then it also culminates in this advice shortly after that statement: cease from anger and forsake it. The whole idea of doing good in the world rather than doing bad, dwelling in the land and cultivating faithfulness. Make yourself a faithful person to God. Delight yourself in the Lord. Put the Lord first in all in your world and what you're doing. He will give you the desires of your heart. God will bless us if we bless Him. If we concentrate on Him. If we set our life after Him. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him also, and He will do it. He will do what? He will do whatever you need, whatever needs to be done, whatever you desire, whatever your heart's desire is, whatever you have to have. God will take care of that if we will just put Him first in our life, commit our ways to Him. So very good sound advice. As we continue to talk about being strategic, look at Romans chapter 12 and verse 14. It says, "Bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse." Now, this is a wonderful verse, and we've used it oftentimes, but I want to break it down a little bit better. How do we understand the word persecute here? Do we understand the word persecute as in somebody's beating you up, or somebody's calling you names, or somebody's mistreating you for your stand for Christ? That's one idea of persecution, but we can persecute one another in lots of other ways. Someone causing stress or anger or discomfort because of a position, a behavior, or an attitude. What do you do about that? That would be the same. That would be a type of persecution, same as other types of persecution. If someone is angry at you or causing you stress or putting forward ideas that you just can't accept as a Christian, if they're making you uncomfortable in their settings, then that can be a means for or a reason for you to become angry. But we've got to resist that. So we've got to be strategic. How do we understand the idea of a curse? Well, a lot of times we think of cursing as saying bad words, but that's not at all it in this particular case. Basically, what he's saying is we want to bless those who cause us to be uncomfortable. We bless those who demonstrate a lack of care for us in our ways. We want to bless those who are persecuting us in any way, shape, or form. We want to bless them. We do not want to be a curse to them. We don't want to be somebody that's going to bring them down or strike at them or make their lives miserable, or any of the other things. We're not going to seek vengeance because we're trying to be strategic in our anger. Strategic anger is blessing anger. It's comfort anger. It's anger that makes things better because we shift the focus away from ourselves and we shift it into blessing and serving other folks instead of hurting them. Those are things that are very biblical in nature. Second idea was to calm your nervous system. I think we have so much to say about this. If we can just take the time in our anger to process that anger before we strike out, to find productive ways and good ways to make it something that we are entertaining, we can go far into making the world a much better place than it is right now. Look at Proverbs 15 and verse 18. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict. If you don't take the time to control and calm your nervous system, the first thing you're going to do is become a hot-tempered person. You're going to start stirring up conflict. But the one who is patient calms a quarrel. That's what I think God calls us to be, is those patient people who calm quarrels rather than causing them. We don't want to strike out at other folks. Instead, we want to help other folks to stop striking out at someone else. We are peacemakers, not just peace lovers, folks. Blessed are the peacemakers, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. Everybody is a peace lover, but sometimes peace doesn't happen. But a person who is able to make peace, to lead folks to be at peace with one another, is a person that's according to the heart of God. Look again at Ephesians chapter 4, verse 31. Paul says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. All of those things, the bitterness and the wrath and the anger and the clamor, all of those things are part and parcel of the same thing. They're a response to a hurt or perceived hurt. They're a response to what our nervous system will be getting out of control about. And then the idea of slandering and malice, I think, are the things that result from that wrath and that anger and that clamor. You're going to be far less likely to say something horrible about somebody else if you're happy with that person than if you're angry with them. When we're angry, we say all kinds of stuff. We call people names. We do all sorts of things that aren't right and good. And so Paul is just saying, let all of that go. Let it get rid of it out of your life. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor, slander be put away from you, along with all malice. These things take a calm and a controlled person. If we want to be able to do this, we've got to be calm and controlled people. If you're not a calm and controlled person, then I think God would like you to be that. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't times for proper anger. We're going to continue to look at that as we continue the series. There are times for proper anger, and there are times for righteous anger, but not all of our anger is righteous, and most of it is not. So we have to be very cautious how we approach the idea of anger. Next thing it says is reduce irritants. All right. How do you reduce irritants in your life? Well, there's lots of things that are irritants, and it's different for every person. But can we simplify our lives and therefore reduce our stress and our anxiety and our anger? Just a few thoughts from the world today. It seems to me like most people are watching way too much television news. And I say that just with the idea that television news is all slanted. We all know it, but somehow we don't seem to ever realize it. We know that if you're watching certain news programs, you're going to be getting a slant to the right of politics. And if you're watching other news programs, you're going to be getting a slant to the left of politics. Everything is slanted, and everything is intended to make people in this world angry, I think. So maybe you need to watch some news less. Turn it off a little bit more, get out in the open, do some things that are productive instead of just watching news all day. I had to stop watching news years and years ago. I just don't watch television news because I just can't stand the way it's put together. With my own journalistic background, I think it's not really journalism these days. It's really just it's just propaganda with a political spin. All right. So watch television news less. Maybe it will help some of your irritation levels. Step back from social media for a while. Sometimes I find that we get really angry at one another on social media from time to time, and the reason is because somebody is expressing a viewpoint that's not our own, and they get a lot of friends following them, and they say, "Hey, that's right on." We're saying it's not right on, and so you get in a fight or a fuss on the internet. That's just a bad way to go about business. So maybe sometimes we need to step back from social media for a while. Maybe we need to expand your news analysts to include views that are vastly different from your own. If you're used to watching only one television program, one network, one TV network that gives you news, try looking at the opposite view for a while. It may make you mad at first, but if you watch long enough, I'm pretty sure you'll find some ways that you can get some common ground, at least some things in your life. So let's be open-minded like that and have a chance to expand our ideas that way. So we can reduce irritants in a lot of ways. If you're irritated because you're always late to work, get up a little earlier in the morning. If you're always tired, go to bed a little earlier at night. Don't watch the late show. Just watch the late show, and you have a little bit more sleep time. All those things are possibilities to help you to be able to cope with the irritations and so on. Look at 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 6 and 7. Paul says, godliness actually is a means of great gain when accompanied by contentment. The idea of getting rid of irritants in our life is to find contentment in our life. We have brought nothing into the world, so we cannot take anything out of it either. And that nothing into the world is not just physical things. It's not just things like money and houses and cars and so on. It's also ideas and it is politics. All right, all those things are not going to go past this world. So if you're getting so caught up in them that you can't have joy in this world and you can't be at peace with others in this world, then maybe you need to get rid of some of those irritants and get them out of your life. All right. That's the idea of this one. The next thing was to reframe the story. And this is probably the hardest thing to do, because it requires us to be very, very patient people. It requires us to be loving people. It requires us to be able to shift our anger to empathy. And you've probably heard a million times that we need to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Before you judge someone else, walk a mile in their shoes. If we could learn to do that very effectively, I think we could save a lot of stress and a lot of wear and tear on one another's emotions. But what we tend to do instead is we tend to wait until somebody else is expressing their needs to us, and then we try to jump in and tell them how our needs are worse than theirs, or how our needs are equal to theirs, or so on like that. Rather than being empathetic, we tend to want to be included in the pity party. All right, now, that's not at all what we're talking about here. We want to reframe the story. We want to learn to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Look at Galatians chapter 6, verses 2 and 3, which speaks on that subject. Bear one another's burdens, and thereby fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. All right, bear one another's burdens means that I've got to take on some of your burden on myself. Now, I may have some burdens that you need to take on yourself as well, but either way, if we can help one another in the burdens category, we can actually reduce our own stress and the stress of other folks. Jesus will say it's more blessed to give than to receive, and we need to learn that. It's also more blessed to serve than to be served, I think, if you can do so. So we need to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. We need to bear one another's burdens. We need to therefore fulfill the law of Christ. Well, the law of Christ, as best I can understand, is do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Treat other folks the way you like to be treated at all times. If you want some empathy, then you got to be a person who can give some empathy. Otherwise, you're just a user and a taker and not a giver. All right. If anyone thinks he's something when he's nothing, he deceives himself. So if you think you've got a control on everything and you really don't, learn to be more empathetic and learn to be more patient, more kind, and more generous in your giving to others, and you'll go a lot further in life. The bottom line is, how much do we love one another? That's what I think we need to find out from stories like this one that I read here. Anything that deals with the idea of anger and wrath and how we strike out at folks. We need to ask ourselves the question, how much do we love one another? We love one another, first of all, enough to listen. I mean, really listen. All right. Many times I think we're listening just to wait for the next chance for us to jump in and talk. I'm waiting for my chance to say something that's really profound to you rather than listen to what you had to say. And so it is when somebody is expressing a need or a desire or a shortcoming or a concern. We're just listening so that we can then tell them how they're wrong. All right. We need to learn to do just the opposite of that. We need to listen so that we can be empathetic toward another person. Do we love a person enough to care for them, to really care for them, to care about their needs, to care about their feelings? Or are we really just waiting for the chance to tell them how they're wrong and how this or that commentary on the news told us that they're wrong and so on? Is that what we're waiting for? Or are we really and truly caring about people because we really want to know how they feel about things? Do we love folks enough to change if we need to? If there's something that I'm thinking that's wrong, if I've got a wrong attitude, a wrong idea, if I have a stereotype or a prejudice that I've held on to for all my life, if I have a bias against somebody or a group of folks because everybody in that group acts this certain way or whatever, if that's my feelings about things, then I need to change. I need to change my way of thinking. I need to change my attitudes. I need to change so that I can be a more empathetic person. Empathy is going to go much further than being right or being politically right or being angry all the time. So do I love other folks enough to change if I need to? Do I love them enough to refrain from active anger? I hope so. Active anger is going to get us into trouble most of the time. But do I also love them enough to refrain from passive anger? Passive anger, I think, is far greater problem because we can hold that anger inside for so long that it'll eventually eat us away and make us bitter people. We've got to escape from that idea. Do we love folks enough to refrain from passive anger? Do we love them enough to serve them, to encourage them, to edify them, to bless them, rather than to curse them and to slander them and to cause malice of forethought or whatever, malice toward them? Do we love them enough to encourage them? Love them enough to serve them, to become a slave to them? Do we love them enough to edify them, to bless them? If we don't, then we don't love enough yet, folks. Christ loved us enough to die for us. Do we love each other enough to do that for one another? Would we be willing to do that? Or are we just looking for a way to reframe the story to our own way of thinking and our own way of liking things? I hope that we love each other enough to love from the heart, that we can change our lives one at a time, that we can be more apt to listen to one another, more apt to love one another, more apt to change if we need to. We'll be more apt to care for one another and serve one another. That's what Christ wants us to do. As we close the lesson this evening, I just want to encourage you, as I always do, by way of an invitation. If you need to come to Christ Jesus, if you have not been saved by him, if you haven't given your life over to him, if you haven't served him to the extent that you're going to die to yourself and live for him, if you haven't ever repented of your sins for that reason, I offer you at this time that opportunity to do so. You can contact us in many different ways by going to the internet and finding our numbers and so on. It's all available to you. If you're listening to this, you can let us know in the chat. Whatever it is that you'd like to do to let us know. If you want to be baptized in the Lord, we'll find a way to do that tonight if you'll let us know and give us the opportunity to do that with you. Or if there's anything else we can do to serve you, help you, we can listen to you, we can care for you, if we can love you, we want to do that as well. So let us know what your needs are tonight as we stand in as we sing the select song. Remain seated if you want to. Give me just a second to get the song service up, and we'll be right on our way.